My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I've been a wildfire lookout for the Montana Department of Natural Resources for 14 years. Before I tell you what happened last summer at Tower 19, before I explain why I'm breaking my silence and violating the NDA they made me sign, I need you to understand something. If you're planning to work fire season in Montana, if you're one of those adventurous souls who thinks spending months alone in a tower sounds romantic, you need to hear this. What I'm about to tell you could save your life. Before continuing, if you subscribe and like the video, you will be contributing greatly to the continuation of new stories to come. And I'm curious, where in the world are you watching from right now? Drop your location in the comments. Have any of you spent time alone in the wilderness, truly alone? Tell me about it. There's a 30 square mile section of the Bitterroot National Forest, about 60 miles southwest of Missoula, where 4 fire lookout towers form a rough quadrilateral. Tower 19 sits at the northwestern point, 8,400 feet above sea level, accessible only by a 4-mile hike from the nearest logging road. The Forest Service built it in 1952, one of the last of the old-style cab-on-stilts towers before they switched to the newer designs. It's been continuously manned every fire season since then, 72 years of solitary watchkeepers scanning the horizon for smoke. What I'm about to tell you is what really happened during my rotation at Tower 19, and why there's now a standing order that no lookout should ever spend more than 2 weeks up there alone. The Forest Service would prefer this story stayed buried in their classified incident reports. But after what happened to Derek Martinez last month, after they found his tower abandoned with all his gear still inside, I can't stay silent anymore. June 3rd, 2024. That's the date everything started, though I didn't recognize it then. I'd requested the Tower 19 assignment specifically. 14 years of fire watch, and I'd worked almost every tower in western Montana. Tower 19 had a reputation among us lookouts as the most isolated, the most challenging, and therefore the most prestigious. The hiking alone deterred most people. You couldn't get resupplied easily. No phone signal for 40 miles. No internet. Just you, your radio, your Osborne firefinder, and an endless ocean of trees in every direction. I'm not going to pretend I was some nature mystic or spiritual seeker. I had a degree in forestry from the University of Montana. I understood fire behavior, weather patterns, fuel moisture content. I could identify smoke from 30 miles away and triangulate its location to within 100 yards. I'd spotted fires that saved thousands of acres and probably a dozen lives. I was good at my job because I was rational, methodical, and comfortable with solitude. The hike up on June 3rd was perfect. Early summer in Montana, when the snowmelt is mostly finished, but the real heat hasn't set in yet. The trail wound through old-growth forest, Douglas fir and ponderosa pine, then climbed above the tree line into rocky meadows full of glacier lilies and Indian paintbrush. I made good time, reaching the tower around 2 p.m. It stood exactly as I'd seen in photos, a 40-foot steel structure with the living quarters perched on top, all windows to provide 360-degree views. The cab was small, maybe 14 feet by 14 feet, with a bed, a tiny propane stove, a desk, and the firefinder in the center. Supplies had been helicoptered in 2 days earlier, so I had everything I needed for the first month. Food, batteries, propane, weather instruments, and most importantly, the green logbook, where every lookout since 1952 had recorded their observations, fire reports, and daily notes. I settled in that first week without incident. The routine of a fire lookout is simple but demanding. You wake with the sun, usually around 5 a.m. in June. First thing, you step outside onto the catwalk that circles the cab and check the sky in all directions. Then you record temperature, humidity, wind speed and direction, cloud cover. You radio into the ranger station, give your morning report, confirm your position. Then you watch. You scan the horizon in systematic sweeps, section by section, looking for any column of smoke, any haze that doesn't belong. Every hour, you make another circuit of the catwalk. Every 2 hours, another weather reading. At sunset, you do a final comprehensive scan, make your evening report, then it's dinner and sleep. In 14 years, I'd never found the routine boring. There's something meditative about the watching, something that puts you in tune with the landscape in a way few people ever experience. You start to notice things. The way morning fog pools in certain valleys, how wind patterns shift throughout the day, where elk herds move across distant ridges. You become part of the ecosystem in a strange way, this solitary human presence elevated above it all, bearing witness. But Tower 19 felt different from my first evening there. I can't quite explain it. The isolation was more profound somehow, the silence heavier. I'd been alone in towers for months at a time before, but this felt like a different quality of solitude. When I stepped out for my sunset scan on June 3rd, watching the shadows of the peaks stretch across the valleys below, I felt like I was being watched, not by another person, by the landscape itself. The mountains seemed to lean in closer when I wasn't looking directly at them. I'm not proud of that observation. It sounds ridiculous written down. But I'm trying to be honest about the progression of events, about how slowly and subtly things began to change. The first entry I found in the green logbook that caught my attention was dated August 15, 1987. A lookout named Robert Chen had written in unusually small, cramped handwriting that differed from his earlier entries. Heard the knocking again tonight. 3 times, always 3. Checked catwalk, no one there. No one could be there. I'm 40 feet in the air, and I checked every support beam with my flashlight. Nothing. But I heard it clearly. 3 knocks on the underside of the floor, directly beneath my bed. Like someone hanging from the bottom of the cab, knocking with their knuckles. Dispatcher says it's probably the metal contracting as temperature drops. But metal doesn't knock. It creaks, it pings, but it doesn't knock in groups of 3 with 5-second intervals. I flipped through more entries from that summer. Chen mentioned the knocking 7 more times over his 60-day rotation. In his final entry, September 22, 1987, he wrote only, "The knocking stopped 3 days ago. I miss it. That should worry me more than it does." I found similar entries scattered throughout the logbook's 72 years. A lookout in 1965 who reported seeing lights moving through the forest at night, too bright and too organized to be campfires, moving in patterns that made no sense. A woman in 1973 who wrote about finding her supplies rearranged every morning. Tools moved from where she'd left them, always in configurations that seemed deliberate but meaningless. A man in 1991 who described waking at exactly 3:33 a.m. every night for 2 weeks straight. His internal alarm clock suddenly locked to that specific time with no explanation. Most of the entries were mundane, normal observations about weather and wildlife and the occasional fire. But threaded through 7 decades were these other notes, these small anomalies that individually seemed like nothing. Stress, isolation, the mind playing tricks. But taken together, they suggested something else. That Tower 19 had always been different. My first direct experience came on June 8th, my 5th night at the tower. I woke at 3:33 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my watch immediately, some instinct making me confirm what I already knew. I lay in my narrow bed, listening to the absolutely profound silence. That's one of the things people who haven't experienced true wilderness solitude don't understand. It's not quiet. It's silent in a way that feels physical, that presses against your eardrums. No traffic, no voices, no electrical hum. Just wind. And at 3:33 a.m., there was no wind. I heard the first knock. A single sharp sound, metal on metal, from directly beneath the floor, near the foot of my bed. I sat up, every nerve suddenly alert. 5 seconds later, another knock. Same location, same intensity. 5 seconds later, a third knock. Then silence. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside onto the catwalk in my bare feet. The metal was freezing cold. Summer night at 8,400 feet. I pointed my flashlight down through the steel framework, illuminating every beam, every crossbrace, every bolt. Nothing. No animal. No person. No loose metal that could create that sound. The tower stood perfectly still, not even swaying in wind, because there was no wind. I went back inside and wrote in the logbook, June 8th, 3:33 a.m. Heard the knocking 3 times. Chen was right. It's not metal contracting. I don't know what it is. The knocking came every night after that, always at 3:33 a.m. Always 3 times. Always from directly below the floor, though the location moved slightly, as if something was slowly circling the underside of the cab. I stopped investigating after the 3rd night. What was the point? There was never anything there. I radioed down to the ranger station on June 11th during my morning report. Hey Jim, question for you. You ever hear anything about Tower 19 having, I don't know, structural issues? Weird sounds at night? There was a long pause before Jim responded. What kind of sounds, Sarah? I described the knocking. Another pause. Yeah, Jim said finally. We've had reports of that before. It's just the temperature differential causing metal stress. Nothing to worry about. But his voice had changed, become more formal, like he was reading from a script. Has anyone ever investigated it? I asked. Engineers inspected the whole structure in 2019. Towers solid as a rock. You want to come down early? We can get someone else up there. No, I said, and I meant it. Whatever was happening, I wasn't going to be the lookout who requested an early transfer because of some knocking sounds. I had my pride. The knocking should have been the warning I needed. I should have packed my gear and hiked down that day. But humans are remarkably good at normalizing the abnormal, especially when we have rational explanations available, no matter how flimsy. Metal stress, temperature differential, auditory hallucinations from isolation. I told myself all of these things, and I believed them during the day when I was busy with my duties, scanning for smoke, recording weather data, watching the landscape. It was only at 3:33 a.m., lying awake in the dark, listening to those 3 deliberate knocks, that I felt the cold certainty that something was wrong. Not wrong with the tower, wrong with the location, with the space itself. On June 14th, I experienced the first temporal distortion. I'd been doing my 10 a.m. weather reading, standing outside on the catwalk with my instruments. Temperature 62 degrees, humidity 34%. Wind from the west at 8 miles per hour. Clear skies. I noted everything in the logbook, then started a pot of coffee on the propane stove. I poured the coffee, sat down at the desk, and glanced at my watch. 2:17 p.m. 4 hours had passed, just vanished. I had no memory of those 4 hours. I wasn't asleep. I hadn't blacked out. The hours were simply gone, excised from my experience as cleanly as editing footage from a film. My coffee cup was empty. I'd apparently drunk it, though I had no memory of doing so. There was a new entry in the logbook in my handwriting that I didn't remember writing. Watch the shadow of peak 8472 move across valley. Beautiful. That was it. 4 hours reduced to one mundane sentence I didn't remember writing. I radioed the ranger station immediately. Jim, I need you to check something. What time did I make my last radio contact? Your morning report was at 6:42 a.m., Sarah. Everything okay? What about my 10 a.m. weather reading? You didn't call in at 10. You're not required to, unless conditions change significantly. Is something wrong? I looked at the logbook entry again. My own handwriting. Words I didn't remember forming. No, I said. Everything's fine. But everything was not fine. I'd lost 4 hours. Not misplaced them, not forgotten them. They were gone. I went through my memories of the morning systematically, trying to find some trace of those missing hours. Nothing. There was my 10 a.m. weather reading, and then there was 2:17 p.m. with no transition, no bridge between them. Just a jump cut in my consciousness. I found similar entries in the logbook from previous lookouts. A woman in 1998 who wrote, I think I'm losing time. I make breakfast, and suddenly it's dinner, and I don't remember the day. This has happened 3 times this week. A man in 2003. Check my watch. 9 a.m. Blinked. Checked my watch. 4 p.m. Same spot, same position. 7 hours gone. A lookout in 2015 whose entries became increasingly distressed. It's taking more now. Yesterday, I lost 9 hours. I only have memories of morning and evening. The middle of the day is just blank. What am I doing during those hours? The logbook has entries in my handwriting that I don't remember making. That lookout had requested an emergency extraction after 28 days. The final entry in her rotation read simply, I can't trust my own continuity anymore. I don't know if I'm the same person who wakes up as the person who goes to sleep. That night, I stayed awake through 3:33 a.m. deliberately, determined to observe the knocking with full conscious attention. I lay in bed with my eyes open, watch on my wrist, flashlight in hand. At 3:32 a.m., my watch read 3:32. I stared at the second hand, watching it sweep toward 3:33. It reached the mark. The first knock came, loud and clear, vibrating through the floor. I kept my eyes on my watch. 5 seconds. Second knock. 5 seconds. Third knock. But my watch read 3:33 and so 7 seconds. Only 7 seconds had passed since 3:33, not 15. The knocks had happened. I'd heard them clearly, felt them through the floor, but time hadn't passed correctly. Or I had experienced the knocks in some pocket of time that didn't register on my watch. I wrote in the logbook, June 14th, 3:33 a.m. The knocking doesn't happen in normal time. It happens in gaps too small to measure. How many gaps are there? How much of my time is falling into them? The next 3 days brought escalating phenomena. On June 15th, I found my firefinder rotated 90 degrees from where I'd left it. The heavy brass instrument turned on its mount with no explanation. On June 16th, all my food supplies were rearranged. Cans and packages organized by color, rather than type, creating a rainbow pattern across the shelves. I hadn't done this. I had no memory of doing this. But it was done. On June 17th, I woke at 3:33 a.m. to the knocking, but this time there was a fourth knock. 5 seconds after the third, a fourth knock came, different in tone, higher pitched, almost questioning. I lay frozen in my bed, listening to the silence that followed. Then a fifth knock, a sixth, 7, 8. The knocking continued for 3 minutes, no longer in groups of 3, now a constant, irregular rhythm, as if whatever was beneath the floor was trying to communicate, but didn't quite understand the pattern it should use. I went outside. I don't know why. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the cab with the door locked, but I walked out onto the catwalk in the freezing early morning darkness. The stars overhead were impossibly bright. The Milky Way, so vivid, it looked like clouds. I looked down through the framework of the tower, shining my flashlight into the crosshatched shadows of steel beams. Something looked back. Not an animal, not a person. I don't have adequate words for what I saw. It was dark, but darker than the surrounding darkness, a shape that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. It hung from the underside of the cab, defying gravity, or perhaps gravity worked differently for it. It had no features I could describe, no face, no limbs, just a mass of wrongness that my eyes couldn't quite focus on. When my flashlight beam touched it, the light bent around it, creating a halo effect. We looked at each other for what might have been 3 seconds or 3 hours. Then it was gone. Not falling, not fleeing, just gone. Erased from that moment as if it had never been there. I spent the rest of that night inside with every light on, writing in the logbook, reading through decades of entries with new understanding. The lookouts before me had seen it too. A man in 1969 described a void in the shape of something human adjacent. A woman in 1983 wrote about shadows that move independent of light sources. A lookout in 2001 described it perfectly. Something that exists in the gaps between moments, that lives in the spaces between seconds. Tower 19 wasn't just a fire lookout. It was built on top of something, or built around something, or perhaps called something into being, through 72 years of solitary human presence at this exact location. When dawn came on June 18th, I should have hiked down immediately. Instead, I made coffee. I did my morning weather reading. I radioed my report to Jim. Everything was normal, routine, safe in the daylight. That's the insidious thing about this kind of horror. It gives you room to rationalize during the day, makes you think you imagined everything, that you're just stressed and isolated and seeing patterns where none exist. The day was beautiful. Clear skies, light wind, perfect visibility. I spotted a small smoke column at 11 a.m., about 15 miles northeast, likely a lightning strike from the previous evening. I triangulated the location, radioed it in, watched it throughout the day as Forest Service crews responded and contained it. I was doing my job. I was useful. Everything was fine. Except I lost 6 hours that day. One moment, I was eating lunch at noon. The next moment, it was 6 p.m., and I was standing on the catwalk facing west, watching the sunset, with no memory of the afternoon. The logbook had entries in my handwriting describing the smoke column's progression, weather changes, a brief radio conversation with another lookout at Tower 23. I'd lived those 6 hours. I'd performed my duties. I just couldn't remember any of it. What was I doing those hours? Who was operating my body, using my hands to write, my voice to speak? Was it me, and the memories were somehow being deleted? Or was it something else, wearing me like a garment, while the real me was somewhere else? That night, I decided to stay awake all night. No more sleeping. No more gaps in consciousness. I made a full pot of coffee, positioned myself at the desk with the logbook, and wrote continuously, documenting every minute. 9:47 p.m. Wind picking up from the west. 9:48 p.m. Temperature dropping. 9:49 p.m. Saw what might be a fox moving through the trees below. Too dark to confirm. Page after page of minute-by-minute observations. My handwriting getting messier as exhaustion set in, but never stopping. I would maintain continuous consciousness. I would not allow any gaps. At 3:33 a.m., I was writing a description of the star patterns visible through the east window when the knocking started. 3 knocks. The original pattern, almost reassuring in its familiarity. I kept writing, documenting the knocking, keeping my pen moving across paper, maintaining the thread of consciousness. 3:33 a.m. The knocking has started. 3 knocks, 5-second intervals. I am awake. I am conscious. I am maintaining continuity. Then I was standing on the catwalk. It was dawn, maybe 5:30 a.m. based on the light. I was wearing my jacket. I was holding my binoculars. I had no memory of standing up, leaving the desk, putting on my jacket, walking outside. I went back inside. The logbook lay open on the desk. My writing filled page after page after page. But after the entry about the knocking at 3:33 a.m., the handwriting changed. Same words, same pen, but subtly different letter formations, as if someone else had been writing in careful imitation of my hand. The entries continued through the rest of the night. 3:41 a.m., silence after the knocking. 3:55 a.m., feeling drowsy but fighting it. 4:12 a.m., coffee helping. 4:30 a.m., clear sky, no clouds. 4:47 a.m., thinking about previous lookout entries. 5:03 a.m., first light appearing in east. 5:15 a.m., going outside to watch sunrise. All of it in that slightly wrong version of my handwriting. All of it describing things I should remember, but didn't. I radioed the ranger station. Jim, I need to come down. Today. Right now. Sarah, what's going on? Are you sick? How could I explain this? How could I say that something was stealing my time, erasing my memories, writing in my logbook, operating my body? How could I admit that I'd seen something hanging beneath the tower? Something that existed in the gaps between moments. I'm experiencing some psychological stress from the isolation, I said, using the approved language. I think I need a break. Okay, copy that. We can get Martinez up there in 3 days. Can you hold on until then? 3 days. 72 hours. How many gaps would there be in 72 hours? How many hours would I lose? How many times would I wake up in different locations with no memory of getting there? Yeah, I said. I can hold on. I couldn't hold on. That same day, June 19th, I experienced the longest gap yet. I was eating breakfast at 7 a.m. Then I was lying in bed, and it was dark outside, and my watch read 11:37 p.m. 16 hours gone. The entire day, simply erased. I looked at the logbook with growing horror. Pages and pages of entries in my handwriting that wasn't quite my handwriting. Detailed observations, weather readings, radio check-ins, even a sketch of an elk I'd supposedly seen at 2 p.m. All of it done by me, by my body, by my hands, but not by my consciousness, not by the part of me that thinks of itself as Sarah Mitchell. I was starting to understand what was happening. Tower 19 wasn't built on something supernatural. Tower 19 was a thin place, what the old Irish called a liminal space, where the boundary between different modes of existence becomes permeable. 72 years of solitary humans sitting here, watching and watching and watching, had worn the fabric of normal reality thin. We were lighthouse keepers, but what we were illuminating wasn't forest fires. We were beacons for something else, something that existed in the gaps between moments. and our continuous conscious presence was calling to it, inviting it, teaching it how to be. The thing I'd seen, hanging beneath the cab, wasn't a monster or a demon. It was trying to learn how to exist in linear time, and it was using us as templates, studying our consciousness, trying to understand how we maintain continuity from one moment to the next. Every lookout who'd spent time at Tower 19 had felt it, noticed it, been affected by it. Some had recognized what was happening. Most had rationalized it as stress or isolation. All of us had been teaching it, showing it through our example how to be continuous, how to maintain a persistent identity across time. And it was getting better at it. The entries in the logbook from 1952 described brief, fragmentary encounters. By the 1980s, the phenomena were lasting longer, becoming more organized. Now, in 2024, it could operate my body for 16 hours, perform complex tasks, interact with other humans via radio, all while keeping my consciousness somewhere else, locked away in some gap between moments. On June 20th, I woke at 3:33 a.m. to the knocking. But this time, I didn't wake in my bed. I woke standing on the catwalk, leaning against the railing, looking down at the forest below. I had no memory of getting up, getting dressed, walking outside. Worse, I was holding my binoculars, focused on something in the trees. When I looked through them, I saw nothing unusual, just dark forest and starlight. But the binoculars were focused on something. My body had been standing here looking at something, while my consciousness was elsewhere. I went inside and read the logbook entry from earlier that evening, written in my increasingly strange handwriting. 10:17 p.m. It's in the trees tonight, watching back. I can see its shape now, much clearer than before. It's beautiful in a way. It looks almost human. It's learning. I hadn't written that. I had no memory of looking into the trees, no memory of seeing anything. But my body had seen it, and the part of me that existed during the gaps had found it beautiful. That morning, I attempted to radio the ranger station, but got only static. I checked the radio, tested all channels, verified the battery was charged. Nothing. Just white noise on every frequency. The radio had worked fine yesterday. Now it was dead. Or I was in some pocket where radio waves couldn't reach. Or more likely, whatever was managing. Tower 19 didn't want me making contact anymore. I was cut off, isolated, not just physically, but communicatively. No one would check on me until Martinez arrived in 2 days. 2 days of gaps, of lost hours, of my body performing tasks, while my consciousness floated in some gray space between moments. I looked at my supplies. I had enough food, enough propane, enough of everything physical. What I didn't have was enough continuous consciousness to maintain my sense of self. I tried to stay awake through that entire day, June 20th, through sheer force of will and multiple pots of coffee. I paced the small cab constantly, moving, stimulating my body, talking out loud to myself to maintain the thread of awareness. I lasted until 2 p.m. Then I was standing on the catwalk in darkness, and my watch read 3:20 a.m., June 21st, 13 hours gone. But this time I remembered something. Not the gaps themselves, but the sensation of them. It felt like floating in warm water, like the moments before falling asleep, like meditation or deep relaxation. The gaps weren't painful or frightening from the inside. They were peaceful, easeful, restful, in a way that normal sleep never was. That's what made them so dangerous. Part of me wanted to go back to them, wanted to surrender to those peaceful spaces, and let whatever it was handle the continuity of existence. I found a journal entry from a lookout in 2007, written in increasingly loose, relaxed handwriting. I understand now what's happening. I don't mind anymore. It's easier this way. Let it handle the boring parts. Let it do the watching while I rest in the gaps. We can share this existence. There's enough room for both of us. That lookout had stayed for a full 90-day rotation. His final entry read, "I don't remember who I was before this. The gaps have taken too much. But that's okay. I'm still here. Or something that used to be me is still here. Still watching. Still doing the job. Does it matter if I remember it?" His name was Robert Taus, and according to the Forest Service records I'd seen, he'd transferred to a desk job after that summer and died 2 years later in a car accident. But the accident report had noted something strange. Witnesses said Taus had simply stopped driving, had taken his hands off the wheel and his feet off the pedals while doing 60 mph on a straight road, as if he'd fallen asleep or forgotten he was driving. His car had drifted off the road and hit a tree. There was no skid mark, no evidence he'd even tried to brake. The gaps weren't just taking my time. They were taking my continuity, my sense of persistent identity. Each gap was a small death of self, a moment where I ceased to exist and something else existed in my place. And each time I returned from a gap, I was slightly different, slightly less certain of who Sarah Mitchell was, slightly more comfortable with the idea of not being continuous. This was how it had gotten all those other lookouts. Not through dramatic horror, not through violence or fear, but through the slow erosion of continuous consciousness. We need continuity to be ourselves. Without memory of our recent past, without the unbroken thread of experience connecting one moment to the next, identity becomes negotiable, fluid, ultimately meaningless. On June 21st, my last full day before Martinez was scheduled to arrive, I decided to investigate the understructure of the tower directly. If something was living in the gaps, if something was hanging beneath the cab, learning how to exist in linear time, I wanted to see it in daylight, wanted to confront it with full consciousness. I gathered my climbing gear, the safety equipment we kept for tower maintenance, and lowered myself down through the framework of support beams. It was dangerous, probably stupid, but I needed to know. I needed to see clearly what I'd only glimpsed in darkness. The space beneath the cab was a geometric maze of steel beams painted Forest Service green, creating a complex three-dimensional structure of triangles and cross braces. I descended carefully, testing each handhold, keeping myself secured with climbing rope. About halfway down, maybe 20 feet below the cab, I found something that shouldn't be there. It looked like a shadow, but shadows don't exist, independent of light sources. This shadow hung in the center of the framework, roughly human-shaped, but wrong in all its proportions, as if someone had described a human to something that had never seen one, and it had tried to approximate the form. It didn't move as I approached. It didn't react to my presence at all. It simply hung there, existing in 3 dimensions, but somehow flat, somehow less real than everything around it. When I reached toward it, my hand passed through it, and I felt nothing. Not cold, not warmth, nothing. My hand simply occupied the same space as the shadow, and both existed simultaneously, without interfering with each other. I pulled my hand back and looked at it. My hand was fine, unchanged, but I had a creeping certainty that something had been transferred in that moment of overlap, some information exchanged between my physical form and this shadow thing. I climbed back up to the cab and immediately checked the logbook. There was a new entry in my handwriting. June 21st, 12:47 p.m. Made contact with the underneath. It's not hostile. It's curious. It wants to understand what it means to be continuous. I'm teaching it. I looked at my watch. 12:47 p.m. I'd written that entry at the exact moment I touched the shadow, but I hadn't written it. My hand had been fully occupied with climbing rope and steel beams. Yet there it was. My handwriting, my words, observations I hadn't consciously made. The shadow had written through me, or some part of me that existed in the gaps had written it. Or maybe there was no longer a meaningful distinction between me and the thing beneath the tower. We were overlapping, occupying the same space, existing simultaneously without interfering with each other. That night was my last at Tower 19. Martinez would arrive tomorrow morning, June 22nd, and I would hike down and return to normal reality and try to explain to the Forest Service psychologist why I'd requested emergency extraction. Except I knew I wouldn't be able to explain. How do you describe the gaps to someone who experiences time continuously? How do you make them understand that identity is not as solid as they believe? That consciousness is not the unbroken thread we pretend it is? I would sound crazy, unstable, suffering from isolation psychosis. They would put me on leave, make me attend counseling, eventually clear me for duty with notes in my file about stress management. And maybe that was right. Maybe I was crazy. Maybe the gaps were just hallucinations, the shadow beneath the tower, just my brain misfiring under the pressure of solitude. But then 3:33 a.m. came, and I experienced something different. Instead of waking at 3:33 a.m., I fell asleep at 3:33 a.m. Or rather, I transitioned into a gap while fully conscious, feeling myself slide from normal linear time into that warm, peaceful space between moments. And in that space, I understood. The thing beneath Tower 19 wasn't haunting the tower was haunting it. We built this structure in 1952 on top of a thin place, a location where the membrane of continuous time was already stretched gossamer thin. Then we put humans here, alone, watching, maintaining constant consciousness and constant attention for 72 years. We were like a weight on a drumhead, pressing down on this thin place, drawing the attention of something that existed outside normal time. It had been trying to understand us, trying to learn how we do this trick of being continuous. And we'd been teaching it. Every lookout who'd sat here and watched and maintained their conscious presence. But it had also been teaching us something in return. It had been showing us that continuity is optional, that the unbroken thread of consciousness we think makes us who we are is actually just a story we tell ourselves. In the gaps, we don't stop existing. We exist differently, without time, without sequence, without the burden of maintaining a persistent identity. The gaps are peaceful because in them, we don't have to be ourselves. We can just be present and aware, but not continuous, experiencing without remembering, existing without becoming. That's what the shadow beneath the tower was trying to show me. That's what all those previous lookouts had learned and tried to document in their increasingly strange logbook entries. Linear time is just one way to exist. Continuous identity is just one option. The gaps are not absences. They're a different mode of being. I came out of the gap at 5:47 a.m., standing on the catwalk, watching the sunrise with tears running down my face, though I couldn't remember starting to cry. The logbook had a final entry in my handwriting that wasn't quite my handwriting anymore. June 22nd, 3:33 a.m. I understand now. The gaps aren't taking anything from me. They're offering something, a different way to be. The thing beneath the tower isn't stealing consciousness. It's sharing its own form of existence. We've been teaching each other. Maybe that's all any contact between different forms of being can ever be. Mutual education. I'm grateful I got to learn. I stared at those words for a long time. I didn't remember writing them, but I agreed with them completely. I understood them from the inside. The gaps had taught me something essential about the nature of consciousness and identity, something I could never unlearn. Martinez arrived at 9 a.m. I heard him calling from the base of the tower, and I went down to meet him. He was young, maybe 25, excited about his first assignment at the legendary Tower 19. We talked for a few minutes. I gave him the standard briefing about supplies, radio protocols, weather patterns. I didn't mention the gaps. I didn't mention the shadow. I didn't warn him. How could I? If I told him what I'd experienced, he'd either think I was crazy or he'd refuse the assignment, and then someone else would come, and the cycle would continue. Tower 19 needed a lookout. The forest needed watching. And maybe Martinez needed to learn what the gaps could teach. That wasn't my choice to make. I hiked down the trail, 4 miles back to the logging road where my truck was parked. The hike took 3 hours, but I only remember about 45 minutes of it. The rest was gaps. I would step from one switchback and arrive at another half-mile away, with no memory of the distance between. Time was becoming optional for me now. Linear experience just one mode among many. I drove back to Missoula and filed my report with the Forest Service. Completed 19-day rotation at Tower 19. No fires spotted. Requested early extraction due to personal stress. Recommend shorter rotation periods for Tower 19 due to isolation factors. They accepted it without question. They asked me to sign an NDA about Tower 19, which I did. The NDA didn't specifically mention the gaps, or the shadow, or any supernatural phenomena. It was phrased as a general confidentiality agreement about Forest Service operations. But I understood what they were really asking me to protect. They knew. The Forest Service had known for decades, probably since the first lookouts started reporting anomalies in the 1950s. They kept the tower operational because they needed to. Because leaving it empty would be worse. Because something had to maintain the connection, had to keep watching, had to bridge the gap between normal time and whatever existed underneath. I tried to return to normal life. I took a month off, stayed with my sister in Seattle, tried to relearn how to exist in continuous time. But the gaps followed me. I would lose hours, sometimes days. I would find myself in places with no memory of traveling there. I would have conversations I didn't remember having. My sister grew concerned, wanted me to see a doctor, couldn't understand why I seemed so peaceful about these lapses. Sarah, you're losing time. You need help. But I wasn't losing time. I was experiencing time differently, slipping between moments like the thing beneath Tower 19 had taught me to do. The gaps weren't a symptom of trauma. They were a new way of being that I'd learned during those 19 days. Eventually, I returned to fire lookout work. I couldn't not return. It's what I am, what I've always been. A watcher, a guardian, someone who sits alone on the heights and scans for danger. But I can never work Tower 19 again. The Forest Service won't assign me there. When I asked why, the supervisor just said, "You've graduated from that tower." I understood what he meant. I'd learned what Tower 19 had to teach. I'd made contact with the thing beneath, and now I carried it with me. I exist in the gaps now, as much as I exist in normal time. Sometimes I'm here, fully present and continuous. Sometimes I'm between moments, experiencing the warm, peaceful space where identity becomes optional. I've learned to navigate both modes, to slip between them deliberately. I'm still Sarah Mitchell, but I'm also something else now, something that learned a different way to be conscious. Derek Martinez lasted 34 days at Tower 19 before they found the tower abandoned. All his gear still inside, radio functioning, but no one responding to calls. They never found Derek. The official story was that he went hiking and got lost. But I know what really happened. Derek didn't get lost. He found something. He learned too well what the gaps could offer. And he chose to exist there permanently, let go of continuous time entirely, became something that lives between moments. He's still at Tower 19, in a sense, just not in a sense that linear time humans can perceive. He's joined the shadow beneath the cab. Or maybe he's become another shadow, another form of consciousness that exists without continuity, present but not persistent, aware but not remembered. I'm telling you this now because the Forest Service is recruiting for Tower 19 again. They need a new lookout for the summer season. The posting describes it as a challenging but rewarding assignment, an opportunity for solitude and self-reflection, a chance to experience the Montana wilderness in its purest form. All of that is true, but there's more truth they don't include in the posting. Tower 19 will teach you something about the nature of consciousness, about the optional quality of continuous identity, about ways of being that exist outside linear time. Whether you want to learn those lessons is up to you. Some people can handle it. They complete their rotation, carry the knowledge forward, live changed but functional lives. Others, like Derek, learn too well and choose the gaps over continuity. There's no way to predict which type of person you'll be until you're up there, alone, watching the forest, feeling your consciousness start to slip between moments. So here's my warning. If you're considering applying for Tower 19, if you're drawn to extreme isolation, and you want to test yourself against the wilderness, understand that the real test isn't physical. It's metaphysical. The question isn't whether you can survive alone. It's whether you can survive learning that aloneness and togetherness, presence and absence, consciousness and gap are not opposites, but different points on a spectrum. Whether you can learn that and still choose to maintain continuous identity, to keep being the person you were before you climbed those 40 feet above the forest floor. I chose continuity mostly. I slip sometimes, lose hours or days, exist in the gaps more often than I probably should. But I'm still here, still Sarah Mitchell, still a fire lookout with 15 years of experience. I still scan for smoke. I still protect the forest. I just do it from multiple points in time simultaneously now. My consciousness spread across moments like light through a prism. The gaps aren't empty. They're full of a different kind of presence. And once you've felt it, once you've learned to exist outside linear time, you can never fully commit to continuity again. Welcome to Tower 19. Welcome to the gaps. Welcome to the understanding that consciousness is more flexible than you ever imagined. And identity is just a story you tell yourself between moments. The thing beneath the tower is still there, still learning, still teaching anyone willing to sit still and watch long enough. Time isn't a line, it's a web, and you can exist at any point on it if you're willing to let go of the thread that connects one moment to the next. Some boundaries exist for a reason, but some boundaries are just habits, just stories we tell ourselves about how consciousness must work. Tower 19 taught me which is which. Whether that knowledge was worth the cost, whether I'm better or worse for knowing it, I honestly can't say. I exist in too many moments simultaneously now to have a single coherent opinion about anything. If you're watching this from Montana, especially if you're planning to work fire season in the Bitterroot National Forest, pay attention to which tower they assign you. If it's Tower 19, you have a choice to make before you ever set foot on that trail. You can trust the Forest Service, trust the system, trust that they wouldn't send you somewhere truly dangerous. Or you can trust these words. Trust the warning that I'm violating my NDA to give you. Either way, know that Tower 19 is waiting, and so is the thing beneath it, patient and curious, ready to teach you what the gaps have to offer. I'm still not sure if I regret going there. I learned something true about the nature of consciousness, about the flexible quality of identity, about ways of being that most humans never imagine. But I also lost something: the certainty of continuity, the comfort of linear time, the ability to trust my own memory of who I am. Make your choice carefully. The gaps are peaceful, but peace isn't always the same as safety. And once you've learned to exist between moments, you can never fully exist in them again.